Historian and author Kate Bowler writes about a time when she was in Houston during Holy Week. And she was there to do some research and interview people. And while she was there, she thought she would try to find a Good Friday service to attend. And so she called around because she was finding it pretty difficult to actually find a church that was holding a Good Friday service. When she would call, she would sometimes get the message, well, come back Sunday when Jesus is risen. Kate says that she eventually did find a mega church that was holding a Good Friday service. And on that day, she drove into the parking lot, and the parking lot attendant greeted her with, "Happy Good Friday." And then as she entered the church building, the greeter at the door said to her, "Happy Good Friday." And then again and again, as she went to her seat numerous times that morning, she was greeted with those words, "Happy Good Friday." And Kate tells us that to the church's credit, Jesus stayed dead for about 3 songs in the opening worship set. It's tempting to want to skip over the darkness and the death of Good Friday. It's been a long year. We've had enough bad news. And we just want to get on with it. We want to go to Easter Sunday with the chicks and the bunnies and the chocolate Easter eggs. And we want to hear those words about the empty tomb and that Jesus is alive. We want to jump to singing, "Christ the Lord is risen today." And we want to skip, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" I still remember a few years back on an Easter Sunday at Highland, and we were going to be singing "Christ the Lord is risen that day." And so I handed out instruments to all the kids so they could play along as everybody sang together. And I very quickly realized that I forgot to take the cymbals out of the instrument bucket. And it became abundantly clear as soon as we got into the song that there was somebody playing cymbals along to that song. I have no idea who it is, but it brings me so much joy to think about it. And "Christ the Lord is risen today" will never be the same without cymbals. Well, this morning, instead of saying "Happy Good Friday," I am saying to you and to myself, we're going there. We're going to go to the cross, to the darkness, to the anguish. We're going there. And we're going to bring all the darkness, the hate, the evil, the fear, the despair that we have encountered since last Good Friday. And we are going to bring it to the cross. What pain or anxiety or sadness or burdens do you bring to the cross this year? Think about that for a moment. I think of the sadness that I often hear from my daughter when she says, "Mom, COVID is just so hard." On this Good Friday, we bring all those who have experienced isolation and loneliness, and those who have died alone, and we bring them to the one who died alone on the cross. On this Good Friday, we bring those who are laughed at, looked down upon, second-guessed, seemed as suspicious, to the one who was placed in a purple robe and mocked. On this Good Friday, we bring the men, the women, the children who are experiencing unspeakable violence in places like Myanmar. And we bring them to the one who was flogged and crucified. On this Good Friday, we bring to the cross those 3 words, "I can't breathe." And we bring all of those words and all of the pain and injustice and racism that they embody. And we bring them to the one who in the end could not breathe. What else do you bring to the cross? Why do we even bring things to the cross? Why do we reflect on the ridicule that Jesus faced? The way in which he was mocked with the words, "Hail, King of the Jews." Why do we read out loud those awful words, "Crucify him, crucify him"? Why do we read about Pilate, the Roman prefect of Judea, who ultimately handed Jesus over to be sacrificed so that he could keep his job and his position of power? The man who was threatened by the words, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor." Why do we reflect on this story that is full of details that are not child-friendly? When we openly and honestly bring our pain and our darkness to the cross, we meet Jesus, the one who suffered pain and darkness, and somehow we are changed. We can be left with a lasting impression. Jean-Marie Lustiger, the late Cardinal Archbishop of Paris, would tell a story about 3 boys who played a trick on a local priest. The boys would go into the confessional, that enclosed stall in a church with a screen or a curtain to divide the area where the priest sits and the person then confesses their sins. And the boys went into the confessional to confess all sorts of wild stories. And upon confessing, the first 2 boys immediately took off and ran away. But the priest wasn't fooled. But for the 3rd boy who didn't run away, the priest gave him a penance to perform. And he told him to go to the far end of the church and to look up at the big crucifix hanging there and to say to the figure on the cross, "You did all that for me, and I don't care." And he told him to do it 3 times. So the boy, who was still thinking this was a game to be played, went off and looked at the cross and said, "You did all that for me, and I don't care." And then he said it a 2nd time. But by the 3rd time, he couldn't say it. He broke down. He left the church a very changed person. And the archbishop who told this story said, "The reason I know that story is because I was that young man." Jean-Marie Lustiger spent the rest of his life loving, following, and serving Jesus. What is it about the cross that might change you this year, that might change you today? What words stand out to you as you hear parts of the Passion narrative and sing songs about the death of Jesus? What images stick with you? Is there something that you're hearing in a different way this year? The words that stand out for me this year are the words spoken by the high priest. We have no king but the emperor. What was central to Israel's faith was proclaiming and living out that God alone is Lord. And yet, in this moment at the cross, the official religious spokesperson says, "We have no king but Caesar." This year, I am paying attention to the temptation of going to the foot of the cross and looking at self-giving love, looking at forgiveness, looking at the true king, and then turning around and saying, "We have no king but Caesar." What is it about the cross that might change you today? When we bring the ugliness of the past year and we look at the cruelty of the cross, we have the potential to be changed. When we look at the cross, we see abuse of power. We see human violence. We see injustice. We see betrayal. We see suffering. And we see God. And we think of the words we read earlier in John's Gospel, where Jesus says to Philip, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." And I also think of the words of N.T. Wright, which I have posted on my fridge. And I know I've shared these words with you before, but they are so meaningful for today. If you want to know who God is, look at Jesus. If you want to know what it means to be human, look at Jesus. If you want to know what love is, look at Jesus. If you want to know what grief is, look at Jesus. And go on looking until you're not just a spectator, but you're actually part of the drama, which has him as a central character. Looking at the cross on Good Friday allows us to come face to face with Jesus, who takes the pain of the world into himself and reveals God's self-giving love, God's co-suffering love. He reveals that God has come to meet us, not by staying above pain and sorrow, but by entering into it. Or put another way, being disguised under the disfigurement of an ugly crucifixion and death, the Christ upon the cross is paradoxically the clearest revelation of who God is. When we look to the cross, we see love. We see God dwelling in our midst. But when we go to the cross and bring the pain from the past year and see the love of God, it's not enough to say, phew, Jesus died for me and now I'm going to heaven. Yes, of course, Jesus died for us. Yes, we find deep peace and comfort in the hope of heaven. But we are not just spectators on this earth waiting for heaven. We are followers of Jesus Christ who bring our pain and sadness and darkness to the one who meets us in pain and sadness and darkness. And empowered by the Spirit of God, we pray and live out the words of the Lord's Prayer, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." The cross, the suffering of God, the love of God changes us, but not for someday in the future, but for today. How might the cross change you today? What are you hearing differently, seeing differently? What are you noticing? As we look at the cross, we don't say, "Happy Good Friday." We don't skip over all of the hard stuff. But we do know that Sunday is coming.